So in this little module, I want to particularly summarize this conceptual framework of mine. I've actually created this little online course that I've got the QR code at the end that covers the neurophysiology of emotion and how emotion drives behavior. And this is just like a little summary of being able to understand that. So I use an analogy that I've been using. I've been teaching this kind of stuff for about a couple of decades now, and I often teach in schools, and this is an analogy that I loved using with the teenagers, and I find this sort of just generally very helpful. And this is the idea that your brain, your neurophysiological way of driving your consciousness, can be imagined as having two parts. The one part, which I'm calling this dragon, is our survival brain. And this is our limbic brain with the amygdala and everything around it, sort of brainstem, etc. And the purpose of that we share with the mammalian kingdom is survival. It's this beautiful, powerful, stupid dragon that's got certain instincts and behaviors to try and keep us safe from danger. But as human beings, much later in our evolution, we also have this extraordinary executive brain. So this is our prefrontal cortex. This holds all our higher values and ideals. So this is actually the purpose of this part is self-actualization. What is the meaning of my life? Why do I want to do this? What is important to me? And you can imagine that this is like a dragon master that's supposed to now control the survival brain that has all its own particular instincts. And I think most of us are sort of aware of this model when we think of things like anxiety and panic in terms of how do we manage these biological impulses that we have. So if you think about it, when you go through your day, you're actually always in one of two modes. Either the survival brain is in charge because you're currently under some sort of stress or threat. Your fight, flight, freeze system is going to kick in, or you have certain drives that are important. So for example, if you're hungry or if you're thirsty, if you need to be safe, we'll talk a little bit about power, and obviously our drive for sex and intimacy is all very much to do with the survival brain part of ourselves. And sometimes when we're under threat, that part of the brain will be in charge. The other part, the other mode you might be in is that if your survival brain is nice and quiet, then your executive brain is in charge. And when our executive brain is in charge, there's particular qualities that becomes available to us. So prefrontal cortex makes it possible for us to plan, to have executive planning and figure out what we're going to be doing. That's what gives us the possibility to be empathic. Our survival brain is not able to be empathic on somebody else. Gives us our ability to reflect on both who we are and on something that might have happened. And also all our inhibitory control comes from there. Okay, I'm not going to have that cookie now. I'm going to wait until after supper, or no, I need to sit down and study even when I don't feel like that. So the important thing is to understand that there's a switch between which of the two modes you are in. And that switch is adrenaline. So this is a physiological switch that either puts your limbic brain in charge or gives you the opportunity to have your prefrontal cortex in charge and your whole brain operating. And of course, the kinds of things that's going to switch that switch is anytime you feel under threat. So if there's any threat to your physical safety or emotional safety or your physical expression of who you are, you're going to go into stress mode, and your survival brain will kick into. So that's all very simple and very logical. And let's look a little bit about how we behave and how different we are depending on the mode we are in. So if we start off just with our imagining, actually, let me start off with the dragon side on the right. So if we imagine we are the survival brain in charge, I also call this street view. It's the view that you have like when you're going through a video game and you're seeing just what's ahead of you at the time. When we're in survival mode, we're very much focused on the present because we're trying to sort out what is happening. And we're quite paranoid and vigilant when we are in that mode because we're having to figure out and deal with threat. We bring a huge emotive judgment to whatever is happening. Think of Facebook, right? First comment that comes out after you've published something. And very important, it's biologically driven. There's a little bit of a reward being in survival mode because you're supposed to deal with some sort of threat. But it changes the way your brain thinks because your survival brain is in charge and it will use certain fast thinking networks to be able to make quick decisions. And it literally cuts out the slower prefrontal cortex. So we make assumptions, we jump to conclusions, we don't hear things properly. Our thinking might be very black and white. Our thinking might be quite unstable and inconsistent. Today I think that, but tomorrow when I'm stressed, I might think something else. And we all have this automatic thinking things that we do, and it's not the cleverest part of ourselves, right? So when you do make those really stupid assumptions or have those really little stupid things that you come up with. And what happens is it leads to very particular kinds of behaviors. And we're going to go through those in a bit of detail, because we become very self-focused. We become a bit proud. When we say somebody's narcissistic, you can be guaranteed they are in dragon mode. This is when we become manipulative, and we might be bullying other people, or we might be avoiding and become apathetic. And this kind of thing, obviously, is where people become aggressive and dangerous. The results of which you see on A&E on a Friday night is people are all in dragon mode making trouble. If we then look on the other side and we imagine what it's like when that dragon brain is now nice and quiet, and we can actually bring our masters to the game, now we are able to actually be able to see things with context and with perspective, because we have this possibility to be able to reflect on things. So now we're calm, we're integrated, we're able to have access to all parts of our brain. Now we're able to be generous in our assumptions, and we have access to this higher consciousness that we have. We also now have access to the clever part of our brain. So now we're suddenly able to bring focus and attention to something. We're able to interpret information. We can be rational and logical. And actually, this takes effort. It's like, imagine if you're doing maths. You can't do maths unless you are in this particular kind of mode. You can't learn a foreign language or remember any important information unless you have access to these parts of your brain. And we call this part of ourselves, if all of this of us is in action, we can call this our authentic self. This is when we're able to be compassionate. This is when we're able to be tolerant. This is when we're able to be humble about our own abilities and what we can or cannot do. This is when we're able to be generous towards others and creative and innovative. So all the best stuff you do, when you're having that amazing day at work and you're having amazing consultations, when you're having an extraordinary discussion with your partner, when you're having when you're doing, when you are happy, you are within this authentic self part of yourself. And this is where we're able to be supportive and loving. So particular emotions become possible depending on which mode you're in. And we're going to look at those emotions quickly. So when we are within our authentic self, we're now able to access the emotions of care, play, and seek. These are primal emotions with primal neuropeptides linked to them. And when we are within our survival mode, we are going to be having some of these emotions like grief, fear, and panic. So let's quickly look at those and think of it in terms of feedback and mentoring. So when we're navigating our day and we're navigating consciousness, we always have this dragon, also called the double, which is our survival mode. And our dragon is actually always active. So when you're driving on to work, there's always that part of you that's busy observing your survival brain. All your sense information goes through that limbic system first. And you're screening the environment for if there's any threats or if there's any drives. You know, is there something I need to go and eat, for example. If everything is safe, then that system is quiet, and now your master can engage, and now you are able to be conscious, and you can either be on that quick automatic drive, you know, when you drive to work and you're not even sure there was traffic lights or not, kind of a thing. So you're in that nice neutral space, but you're also now able to do amazing work. So this is when you're able to access all your higher functions and these positive, what I'm going to call emotional rooms. But if there's any threats, so say a taxi pulls in front of you while you're driving and you have to slam on the brakes, then your survival brain is automatically going to kick in. It's going to ring a big alarm. And your instinct is to completely follow where that survival brain is going in that moment. This is very subconscious. It happens before you even think about it. And it can plummet you into these negative emotional tunnels very, very quickly. The trick is obviously to decide which one am I going to follow? Because ideally the dragon is supposed to give the master suggestions. Taxi, taxi, taxi. And then the master will decide exactly how we're going to, well, the dragon will obviously put the brakes on, and the master now then has to decide how do we handle the situation. The dragon might decide, I'm going to chase the taxi down and tell him what I think of all of this. And the master might decide, let's just get to work. It's fine. Let's not act on that particular instinct. So the distressing emotions that happens in dragon mode are very primal. And we obviously have lots of very complicated emotions that build on these primal emotions, but these all have very particular sort of neural networks and peptides that are linked to them. And they're already there when we are very small. So grief panic is one of the first primal emotions that happens, for example, when a small child is cut off from their caregiver. So imagine a toddler lost in the supermarket. There's this extraordinary feeling of being lost or abandoned. But it's also the feelings we have whenever we feel rejected in any way or whenever we feel shame. So if we feel corrected by something, or if we feel we've made a mistake, or if we feel we've done something wrong, this is a primary emotion that comes in. Now, the biological impulse that was created by your survival system is that when you've lost connection, it creates an experience of extraordinary emotional pain. And the idea is that it'll make you cry out. Imagine the toddler screaming at the top of his voice, and hopefully the carer will arise. So obviously this is not appropriate in daily life. You can't scream out, but that emotional pain is still there. And that is why depression is obviously when you are actually getting stuck in that particular emotional tunnel. And this is the kind of things which actually will lead to self-harm and suicide because of this extraordinary pain. And of all the negative emotions, it's probably one of the most painful emotions to be in. Fear, we all know very well. That's a primal emotion that says something is unsafe. I need to move away from there. And that can be anything from a little bit of worry to full terror. And of course, all of our anxiety disorders is when you're getting stuck within the fear tunnel. And then rage is also when we're feeling unsafe, but there's a biological impulse to destroy an obstacle that's in the way. You've all had that experience, hey? That feeling of wanting to crash through something. And it can be extremely difficult if you're on the receiving end of that. So if somebody else is in rage mode and they're suddenly viewing you as the obstacle that they want to destroy. And of course, all of our aggression lies within that. So there's also positive emotions that, and if you think about the pursuit of happiness, what does it mean to be happy? We actually want to live our lives mostly within these three emotional rooms and spend as little time as possible within those negative emotional tunnels. And there are three main primal emotions, again, on which there's lots of different cognitive emotions that build on those. The first one is care. I think that one is very well known. And obviously that's oxytocin driven. And this is any time when we feel nurturing and caring somebody else. So it could be nurturing for a child or a parent, then it's sort of hierarchical, but also you're nurturing of a friend, you're nurturing of a colleague, you're nurturing of a patient that you are caring for. And the qualities that come when we're in this space, it makes us possible to be compassionate, to be open, to be warm. And we obviously have access to our prefrontal cortex when we are in this. And this is the experience of this feeling is an experience of contentment, of joy, of love, of being loved. The second positive emotion is play. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. That's when we do an activity done for its own sake. And this is the foundation for all friendship and community building and relationship building. Those are all the hobbies that we have, all the stuff we do because we love doing it, whether it's going for a run or whether you're doing the arts or whether you're hanging out with friends. But I want to spend a little bit of time on seek. So we have a positive emotional room, which has actually also got its own neuropeptides, and it's based on the animal kingdom also have it. So with animals, it's based on this experience of curiosity and interest. And it was built into the mammalian kingdom so that imagine your cat in a new room will go and sniff anything and check everything to see what resources are available, what's happening in my environment, and specifically looking for things that might be nice. But as human beings, we also have this, and we've cognitively extended that. So these neural networks actually include our frontal lobes in all of and it's a positive emotion that is linked to exploration, learning, adventure, and it's the key to much of human endeavor. And it's when you are in a space where you're learning something that you're really interested in, or that's really fascinating, or that you're really learning. And we spend a lot of time in the seek space. So if you're problem solving with your patients and you are, for example, within the care and seek space, that will create a very different kind of consulting room than if you are in a rage or fear space when you're busy consulting. So when I talk about this seek space, because we have this emotion, so I want you to think of it as an emotion, and it creates this possibility of curiosity and inquiry, and it gives us our cognitive capacities of problem solving and innovation, teaching and mentoring all lies within this possibility. So if we're both in seek spaces together, if you've got people, somebody who's teaching and somebody who's learning, and the one who's teaching is loving what they're teaching, and the one who's learning is loving what they're learning, then you have an extremely powerful force of innovation and growth. And so one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is, how do we create workspaces that stimulate curiosity and wonder? So I teach a lot at schools. I teach these modules at schools in terms of emotional intelligence within school, emotional competence within schools. And what we find within school curriculums as well is there's a lot of focus on what people have to learn. This is all the stuff I need to teach you. But we don't speak a lot about how do you create an emotional space where children want to learn. Because ideally, if you create a space where people are curious and interested, then you can teach somebody anything. If you're in a space which is unpleasant and negative, then nobody's going to learn. So the similar, nobody of us go home and go and read articles because, well, you might a little bit if you've been told you get in trouble the next day if you haven't read the article, but generally we don't go home and read because out of anxiety or fear. If you're anxious or you're in a bad mood, you're going to go and sit and watch Netflix, right? But ideally, the reason why we read is when we're interested about something. Oh, I saw that patient and I didn't know quite what to do, and then I'm going to go and look it up. We see with interns when they do their really amazing presentations, the best presentations I've seen is when you can see the intern got really interested in this topic. Oh, this is something I didn't know, or I went reading about it, and this is really fascinating. And then that starts creating an interest to learn more. And the question is, how do we create that atmosphere within a department that makes everybody keen and curious and interested in learning? So dragon behaviors is based on these emotional impulses. And I want to talk a little bit about, just go in a little bit and explore some of these behaviors. So I want you to imagine that there's all kinds of external events, as I've mentioned, that happens in the world around us. And that might trigger that dragon, right? It might either be a threat or it might be a particular drive that could activate it. So for example, you're walking on the beach and there's a dog that runs towards you barking. Okay, so something happens. Your dragon gets activated. And that creates a particular emotion. So the emotion is created as a biological impulse to deal with a threat, either to scream out or to run away or to fight whatever is happening. So there's a biological impulse to move that away. And so that's now going to lead to a behavior that is linked to that particular emotion. So emotion is always trying to get us to do something. Very practical when there's a dog that's about to rush at you on the beach. The problem is it's not necessarily always that practical in the sort of the scenarios that we see in our daily lives. So imagine now saying you've got a stimulus and you're in an argument with your partner. So your partner is arguing now there's an emotion. So you have either fear, rage, or grief. These are very unpleasant emotions. And so you have this impulse, this biological impulse to manage this threat. And you end up creating these very complex behavior patterns based on your fight, flight, freeze response to deal with this particular scenario. But they're not necessarily that useful when you're busy having a discussion with your partner. And the book I've got up there, Shazad Jameen, he calls them saboteurs, these behaviors we have that are there. We create them already in childhood, still habits we have on how we deal when we're stressed. Very useful when you're running away from a dog. Not very useful when you're having a discussion with your partner. So if you're running away from a dog or fighting the dog, that's great, but you don't want to be running away from your partner or beating up your partner. So when people are behaving badly, people are behaving in a way that's making you feel uncomfortable, that's their dragon in action. And I'm going to quickly show you 9 different behaviors described by Shazad. And we're going to link them a little bit to imagining within this mentoring feedback space. So firstly, and the one that we all do is criticizing, right? You're feeling stressed, you're not happy about what's happening, and your impulse is to go and tell somebody that they are wrong and why they are wrong. And yeah, you know, the classic ward run, hopefully they don't do that. Which university were you at that kind of nonsense in terms of making you feel like you are? The other thing, oh, we all love that, especially us professors. It's either overanalyzing, lecturing, or what I like to call preaching, right? You all do this with your patients. Your patient has defaulted their treatment and we give them a long lecture on how wrong they've just been. Or mansplaining is a lovely example of preaching to people who already know exactly what the issue is. And then, of course, manipulating or organizing. So those of us who love making Excel sheets and organizing our own lives very well might start organizing everybody else's lives when they are feeling stressed. I'm sure you all have moms who go into control freak mode when things are going wrong. And gaslighting is a good example of this kind of behavior. And of course, all kinds of bullying that we are seeing. There's also freeze mechanisms to reduce anxiety. So if you're somebody who doesn't like conflict and doesn't like fighting, you might go into pleasing mode, saying, you know, if I'm nice, maybe the other person will be nice, but you're not actually saying what you're thinking and you're not actually addressing the issue. Some people, when they get stressed, start fixating on details or obsessing or striving for for excellence, and you get to the point where you're unable to hand that thing in because it has to be perfect. You write 3 pages of notes on every single patient that you see, and it takes you forever to get through OPD. And then, of course, worrying is something that I think all of us do. That's at 3 o'clock in the morning when your brain starts ticking over and you get into that sort of threat survival brain cycle. The more worried you are, the more adrenaline your body makes. So the more you think about things that can possibly go wrong, and the next thing you are worrying all the time. In terms of mentoring, that's when people come and tell you that they have concerns about you. I've been worried about you. I don't really know if medicine is what you're supposed to be doing. Got a bit of criticism in there as well. And then, of course, some people avoid. So we either just don't show up because you're supposed to deal with something, you're supposed to have a difficult conversation, and you don't engage. Those are those medical officers that's supposed to be around for you when you're on call and you can't get hold of him or her. Feeling sorry for yourself. We've all had that 3 o'clock in the morning when you're on call. And sort of a lot of you, feeling that. And you can sometimes have that beleaguered medical officers. We are too busy. We can't possibly also teach. I've done all so much effort, but nobody learns anything. And then the big challenge, I think, when we're talking about addiction behaviors is distracting. And also we all love doing that. So Netflix binging, not that Netflix binging is always a bad thing, but it is a bad thing if you're supposed to be preparing your presentation for the next day. But also all of the root of addictive behaviors is often people dealing with their anxiety and dealing with their stresses by trying to find something else to do. And so when you're dealing with addiction, if you don't deal with these stresses, you're not going to actually manage. So how do we build an appreciative